nobody who's happily married has an affair, right? There's always something that comes before it.
Right.
From that vantage point, I think the real issue is about communication, where spouses stop communicating. One or both of you have a job that has its own stress and pressure. You've got kids. They tend to become the focal point. And I think that's actually maybe one mistake that a lot of married people make. I think we all tend to focus a lot on the kids, and we think that's what we're supposed to do. But I think putting the marriage first is actually what a lot of people are missing.
All right, so got Andrew Grossman here with me today, a family law attorney in Ohio, actually the second best family law attorney.
How was that?
Behind your dad.
Oh, he'll like that. He'll like that. He tells me that all the time.
I'm sure he does. So what was that like growing up, as the son of the best divorce attorney in all of Ohio?
It was an interesting sort of childhood at the kitchen table, asking Dad what he did for a living. And, we're a really nice, happy, intact family. And all of his stories are about families who are breaking up and splitting up and, all that kind of stuff. So it was an interesting lesson because, look, growing up in the 70s and 80s, divorce wasn't as prevalent as it is today. So there were very few kids that I had, friends of mine whose parents were divorced. So I learned a lot.
Yeah. Was there a little bit of a stigma with him being a divorce attorney, though?
Maybe a little bit. I'll tell you, and I didn't know this until after the fact, but when I was in high school, I had a creative writing class, and my teacher was this great lady, and we had to write about a hero. And so I chose to write about my dad, and it was all about how he was, the best domestic relations lawyer in Ohio, and, all about what he does and how great I thought he was. And I got an A on the paper, and she wrote some really lovely comments. I actually still have the paper in my office. And I learned about a year later that at the time I was writing the paper, my dad was representing her husband against her.
Wow.
And so that taught me a little bit of a lesson, right? Know your audience is a good lesson to learn. I employ that in court all the time. Know your audience is important. But the other thing, this really isn't a story about my dad or about divorce law, but it just really gave me like a whole new level of respect for that particular teacher, that she was able to divorce herself from getting divorced and the pain that is. That comes with that, to be able to give this, brat an A on a paper writing about her husband's divorce lawyer. Yeah.
That's a crazy story.
Yeah, it's all true. All true.
So was family law what you always wanted to do growing up?
No, I think what I always wanted to do growing up, I was always interested in the law. I was incredibly interested in working with my dad.
What was it about your dad that you really wanted to work with him?
So, my dad and I always had this great relationship. A great father-son relationship. We sort of have a very similar view on the world and people, and we just always really got along very well. Stark contrast to my brother. So just the opportunity to work with him. And then as I got older, knowing how good he was at what he did, who doesn't want to work with the best?
Absolutely. But was it family law specifically?
That was really the only thing I had much of a window into. But the more that I learned about it as I got older, the more interesting this area of the law came to be. Because I think that a lot of people think that what we do is figure out how we're going to divide the china sets, figure out who's going to be responsible for, wiping Johnny's butt on Tuesdays. And that's how I thought originally, right? That's just kind of what you think. Mm-hmm. And there's a little bit of that in what we do. Certainly we deal with kids all the time, but that is really a very far cry from what my day really is. And that's, I think, the biggest misconception about what divorce lawyers do on a daily basis. Sure. And I guess it's good to not know it. It means you haven't gone through it.
So what would you say they did?
Well, there's the parenting aspect to what we do, which really has a lot to do with these days with decision making, right? Who's going to be responsible? How are we going to get decisions made? And, there are plenty of intact families that don't sort of have that co-parenting thing nailed down, but we expect you to get it nailed down when you're getting divorced. which is a little bit of an interesting...
Kind of odd.
Yeah, right? It's a little ironic. But when you're living in two separate households and you're splitting your time with your kids, being on the same page, or at least having a page that says in an agreement how we're going to deal with these issues, how we're going to make these decisions, really, really very important. But most of what I do has to do with tax on a daily basis. We deal with real property on a daily basis. We deal with business law on a daily basis. Executive compensation plans, ERISA in dividing retirement plans. There's really no area of law that doesn't come into play in some domestic relations cases. But I think the most important thing I do every day is listen.
Mm-hmm.
And you're listening for two things. You're listening for the things that they say. That's important, right? I listen to what you have to say, so I know what you're thinking about. It's also important to listen to what they're not telling you.
Right.
Listening for what they're not saying is sometimes the most important thing you can do. And I think that that's where we've excelled. And that's where I think, every one of the lawyers who works at my firm has either been trained and mentored by my father or by me. And we've been very diligent about making sure that people are listening.
Mm-hmm.
But part of why I'm a good listener is that I'm genuinely curious. And I think if you don't have that, you're going to tread water, right? You're not ever going to sort of advance, or not as far as you might otherwise want to advance. Being curious is a huge part of my life. It's why I travel. It's why I read. I was a literature major in college. I read as much as I can. But being curious about people, being curious about different types of business, being curious about different aspects of the law, all helps you to do your job better. And I don't think that's unique to the law, right? I think that's probably everybody in every profession. You see your employees who are particularly curious, they're the superstars.
But you have to learn, though, to be a good lawyer. I mean, you actually have to know in order to be able to guide your clients down the right path for what's right for them, right?
Yeah, and I think that when you've developed a certain kind of practice, I mean, I've built a firm that can handle a really broad range of domestic relations cases, and you've got to learn about what they do, what they've done, what their company's all about. One of the things I spend probably the largest percentage of my time doing is working on business valuation issues, valuing closely held corporations, family partnerships, things like that. And even though I'm not the one doing the valuation work, right? We hire experts to do that.
Of course.
I'm the one that has to present that. And I'm the one that has to defend it. And I'm the one that has to get the court to say, yeah, that's what it is. So you can't do that if you don't know the business. So it's fascinating to me. And one of the things that helps me do a good job for my clients is that I'm actually genuinely curious about this stuff.
Tell me a little bit about that. Like, how do you deal with your clients?
My approach to dealing with clients, I think first and foremost, you have to know that you are dealing with people at their, generally speaking, at their absolute worst. You know that list that they published of the most stressful things you can go through in your life, right? Death of a spouse or a parent or a child, and then divorce comes right after that on all of those lists. It's one of the worst things that anybody's ever going to go through. And so recognizing that the person that's sitting across from you, that you're just meeting for the first time at this initial consultation, is probably not their best self. And knowing that, you don't know what they're going through. You don't know the struggles that people are facing. And so really, I think the first step to being good or great at what we do is to approach it just from a really understanding place and keeping a really open mind. I think that's really important.
What would you say is a pitfall that a lot of lawyers get into in domestic relations?
I think there are several.
Okay.
A lot of lawyers are very concerned about getting that person who's sitting in the chair across from them to hire them, right? No divorce lawyer is running a nonprofit organization.
Of course.
It's a for-profit enterprise. We're there to make a living. You don't make a living without clients. You want people to hire you. Telling them what they want to hear so that they think you're their guy is a huge mistake. And it sets you up for having nothing but unhappy clients. Because most of the time, what they need to know isn't what they want to hear. In fact, a lot of times what they need to know are the things they want to hear the least. And so being able to give somebody, I don't really even call it bad news, it's just the news, right? Being able to tell somebody what this really is and what they can really expect. Setting reasonable expectations from day one is, I think, a huge key to being successful in any field of law, especially in this field of law.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I think that separates, great lawyers from everybody else is to recognize that your client isn't always right. Sometimes the person with the bad fact pattern comes into your office. Recognizing that your client's human, that your client makes mistakes, that your client's not always right, is the key to helping you get the best outcome for that client in court. Because a lot of times what people think they want the most is really not the most important thing. So that educating of the client along the way about what the important things are, what they really should be thinking about, is a really important thing. I'd love to say like there's some innate ability that allows me to do that that's different than everybody else, right? I mean, I think it takes a lot of hard work and it takes a lot of experience to get to the point where you know how to do that and where you're comfortable doing that with people.
But it carries a lot of burden, though. A lot of people tend to kind of run away from family law after a while. How do you keep going?
First of all, I think it takes a special person to handle these kinds of cases, right? And not everybody's cut out for that. So not everybody wants to have to deal with the stress, the drama that comes along. I mean, there's plenty of drama in some of these cases. And I never thought of myself as particularly naive until I started doing this for a living and realized that, living in my little bubble with a happy family and no real stress or drama and pretty good life, maybe I didn't know what it was all about. You learn pretty quickly.
Yes.
Because people can be pretty horrible to the people they love. And so that was hard at first.
Is it tough to compartmentalize some of this, like from your home life to these stories that you hear day in and day out?
I think that if you have longevity in this practice, you have learned how to not take work home with you, that kind of work home with you. I mean, first of all, you're not going to do your clients any service by adopting their personal struggles as your own. In fact, it's probably the worst thing you can do for them because what they need is somebody objectively looking at what is happening and making some decisions and helping them make decisions about it.
Was there ever a time where you thought about jumping ship and going and being a personal injury lawyer or maybe a corporate defense lawyer?
No.
No? Why not?
I think that my job is never boring. And even though cases have similar narratives or have similar issues, you do see the same thing popping up in cases, they're very different. And it's really the only area of the law that I've ever seen where you get that, where you can be so highly focused and specialized in one particular field, yet still have the variety and the excitement and sort of the breadth and range of issues that come up in our cases. You're not going to get that anywhere else.
Right. Do you see because you're in the middle of it between, the two sides, do you see kind of a common thing that people end up in divorce? I mean, or is there maybe a different way to say that was, do you have some advice you would give people to help them stay out of your office?
A lot of people will come up to me and say, what's the one reason, the thing that causes people to get divorced the most? Is it an affair, infidelity? And that's never the reason people get divorced. Nobody who's happily married has an affair, right? There's always something that comes before it.
Right.
The real issue is about communication. Spouses stop communicating. They're busy. One or both of you have a job that has its own stress and pressure. You've got kids. They tend to become the focal point. And I think that's actually maybe one mistake that a lot of married people make. I think we all tend to focus a lot on the kids and we think that's what we're supposed to do. But I think putting the marriage first is actually what a lot of people are missing. Because if you don't tend to that, it doesn't matter how you're parenting.
Right.
At least that's what the marriage therapists tell me.
That's right. Communicate, right?
Yeah.
So what do you actually achieve in a client's life at the end of when their case is resolved?
Well, I think it's different every time. And that keeps it interesting. To see the personal growth and change in an individual's life from the beginning of you taking their case to the end of you handling their matter is incredibly rewarding to me personally. And it's a lot more than just dollars and cents. I mean, it's great to get somebody more money than they expected to get.
Right.
Wonderful. To sort of pick a hypothetical, a woman that walks into my office who has spent 25 years raising a family, working inside the home, not outside the home, with a husband who maybe hasn't been so nice and supportive along the way, who's been, critical, who's been absent, unavailable. That person comes into your office with that 25 years of experience on their shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
And they, oftentimes, a woman in that situation will lack the confidence that they can make it on their own, that they can be okay, that they're going to be okay. And a lot of people who go through divorce think their life is over. And to take somebody from that point and at the end of the case see somebody who is back to their old self, right? They were always strong. They were always educated. They were always experienced in their own way,
mm-hmm.
but they just didn't feel it and they didn't believe it themselves. And to see them make that progression over the course of a case,
mm-hmm.
and sometimes you're talking about months and sometimes you're talking about a couple of years, but seeing that difference in a person makes you feel like you actually accomplished something.
Right. Makes it worth it.
It makes it all worthwhile.
Where do you see yourself in the next 10 years?
I want to be doing exactly what I'm doing now. In 10 years, I just expect to be doing it even better. And so for me, that's part of that natural curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
There's never a time in your career, I believe, no matter what you do or how long you've done it or how well you've done it, when you don't have anything else to learn, and knowing that you can learn from some unlikely sources too. So I talk to my younger lawyers every day. I'm curious about what they're doing and how they're doing things and how they're looking at things,
mm-hmm.
because they may have a way of looking at something that never even crossed my mind. So I expect that 10 years from now, I'll be doing the same thing, just a little better.
A little bit better.
Yeah.
Well, your curiosity and the way you explain how you do what you do has actually made me potentially thinking about being a divorce lawyer as a second career someday.
We have a rigorous training program. You might have to start by going to law school.
Yeah, I will need to do that first. No, but really, I mean, you took what seemed to be kind of a bit of a boring subject sometimes and actually make it interesting by, talking about all the different aspects that go into it. It's not just who gets to see Johnny on Tuesdays and, who gets the china.
No, it's not. And the reality is that you don't need me to make the subject interesting, because it's far from boring. It's far from a boring subject. It's far from a boring area of the law. But listen, it keeps me moving.
That's right.
Keeps me busy.
Well, hey, I really appreciate you coming out.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Appreciate it.